They didn't just call me ugly at my cousin's wedding. My aunt asked the photographer to crop me out of family portraits. "We don't want Sophia's scars and military haircut ruining the beautiful pictures," she said while my mother nodded and my sister Emma laughed. But what they didn't know was that 24 hours later, Milan Fashion Week's creative director would be offering me a $100 million exclusive contract. It wasn't just the words that shattered me. It was the casual way my aunt delivered them. Like asking someone to move a piece of furniture that was cluttering up an otherwise perfect room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The entire wedding had been a showcase of everything I wasn't. Delicate, polished, conventionally beautiful. Every time someone complimented the family, my relatives would subtly shift to block me from view, as if my presence might somehow contaminate their carefully curated image. I stood there in the church garden, watching cousins pose for pictures in their designer dresses and perfect makeup, and felt like a damaged artifact in a museum of pristine beauty. My face bore a jagged scar from my left temple to my jaw, a souvenir from an IED explosion in Kandahar 3 years earlier. My hair was still growing out from the regulation cut I'd maintained for 5 years of military service. My hands were calloused from weapons training and manual labor, nothing like the manicured fingers that gripped champagne glasses around me. They saw ugliness. They saw someone who didn't belong in their world of country club elegance and social media perfection. But here's what they didn't know. What I was forbidden to tell them due to confidentiality agreements. While they were planning this wedding and debating flower arrangements, Valentina Rossi, creative director of Milan Fashion Week, had been searching the globe for someone with exactly my look. While my family was shopping for the perfect dresses to complement their conventional beauty, fashion's most influential scouts had been studying my photograph for 3 months, calling my features revolutionary and the future of authentic beauty. The irony was suffocating. My aunt, whose greatest aesthetic achievement was a successful nose job, was lecturing me about ruining photographs. My mother, who spent thousands on anti-aging treatments to hide her natural character lines, was nodding along like she was Anna Wintour. And Emma, whose Instagram followers were purchased bots, and whose modeling photos were heavily filtered, was treating me like I was the family's embarrassing secret. The ugly label they loved throwing around conveniently ignored that major fashion houses had been quietly revolutionizing beauty standards for the past 2 years. It ignored that scars, unconventional features, and authentic stories were becoming the most sought-after qualities in high fashion. It ignored the fact that Milan, Paris, and New York had been specifically recruiting women who looked nothing like traditional models. Chaos. They didn't see any of that. Just their damaged daughter, who couldn't fit into their narrow definition of feminine beauty. As the photographer called for another family shot, my aunt's voice rang out again. "Sophia, maybe stand behind everyone else?" It was her polite way of making sure my face wouldn't be visible in yet another moment that might require explanation. I watched Emma adjust her dress, her smile bright and confident, completely comfortable in her role as the family's beautiful daughter. She'd never asked about my scars, never wondered about my military service, never questioned why I'd chosen duty over beauty treatments. The truth was too complicated for their simple narrative. It was easier to have a beauty and a beast than to acknowledge that their definition of attractiveness was pathetically outdated. So I smiled, nodded, and stepped to the back row, carrying their judgment like shrapnel I'd learned to live with. What they couldn't possibly imagine was that in less than 24 hours, I'd be sitting in the most exclusive design studio in Milan, being offered a contract that would make Emma's Instagram modeling look like a high school yearbook photo. But that revelation was still one day away, and for now, I was just the family embarrassment hiding in the back of someone else's perfect wedding album. For 5 years, I'd been living 2 completely different lives that my family couldn't reconcile. While they saw a scarred veteran who'd ruined her face in some foreign war, I'd been quietly building something extraordinary in the hidden corners of the fashion world. It started in Germany during my final deployment, where I wasn't just another soldier stationed at Ramstein Air Base. My background in art history from before I enlisted, combined with my fluency in German and French, had caught the attention of the military's Cultural Heritage Protection Unit. Within months, I was working with European museums and galleries, helping recover and restore artwork that had been damaged or stolen during recent conflicts. The work introduced me to a world I'd never imagined: international art dealers, restoration experts, and fashion designers who were increasingly interested in authentic stories over manufactured perfection. My job was to authenticate pieces, coordinate international transfers, and occasionally model historical military uniforms for museum exhibitions and educational documentaries. But the real transformation happened during my recovery from the IED explosion. While I was learning to live with my new scars, I was assigned to light duty helping with a military documentary being filmed in partnership with several European fashion houses. The project explored how conflict zones influenced contemporary design, how bulletproof materials became haute couture, how camouflage patterns inspired runway collections. That's when Valentina Rossi first saw me. She was consulting on the documentary's fashion segments, and later told me that watching me discuss art restoration while wearing my dress uniform with visible scars was the most powerful representation of modern feminine strength she'd ever witnessed. But at the time, she simply asked if I'd be interested in some freelance modeling work. What started as small jobs, posing for military-inspired fashion shoots, wearing heritage brands in museum settings, quietly grew into something unprecedented. European designers were moving away from traditional beauty standards, seeking models who embodied authentic experiences rather than impossible perfection. My scars, my military bearing, my unconventional features were exactly what cutting-edge fashion was desperately seeking. I spent my leave time doing photo shoots in Berlin, Milan, and Paris, working with photographers who specialized in real beauty campaigns. The work was classified as cultural liaison in my military records, and strict confidentiality agreements meant I couldn't discuss it with anyone outside the fashion industry. While my family planned wedding receptions and criticized my appearance, I was walking runways for emerging designers who saw my story as the future of fashion. While they debated whether my scars could be covered with makeup, international fashion weeks were specifically requesting models with authentic life experiences over perfect faces. The consulting work expanded beyond modeling. Fashion houses began asking me to review their military-inspired collections for accuracy and cultural sensitivity. Museums wanted my expertise on conflict-related art exhibitions. High-end brands sought my input on campaigns that honored veterans without exploiting their service. But the breakthrough everyone was waiting for came 6 months ago when Valentina Rossi called me with an offer that would change everything. She wasn't just planning another photo shoot. She was preparing to launch the largest authentic beauty campaign in fashion history, and she wanted me as the face of the entire movement. The preliminary contracts were worth more than most people made in a lifetime. But everything was confidential until the official announcement. So I sat through family dinners, listening to lectures about my damaged appearance and lack of traditional feminine qualities, while the fashion world's most powerful figures were calling my look revolutionary and the definitive representation of 21st century beauty. They saw ugliness where the industry's visionaries saw the future. They saw damage where designers saw authentic strength that couldn't be manufactured or faked. The call came 18 hours after my cousin's wedding, while I was still replaying the humiliation of being asked to hide in family photos. I was sitting in my small apartment in Arlington, staring at the Purple Heart medal that my family had never bothered to ask about, when my phone buzzed with an international number I recognized immediately. Sophia? The voice was unmistakable. Valentina Rossi speaking in her elegant Italian accent that commanded attention in fashion capitals worldwide. I need you on a plane to Milan, tonight. Everything has changed. I'd been expecting an update about the campaign we'd been planning, but something in her tone suggested this was different. Bigger. More urgent than anything we'd discussed before. There's been a development that requires your immediate presence, Valentina continued. I cannot explain over the phone, but I need you to understand. This is the opportunity we've been building toward for 2 years. Can you be at Dulles Airport in 3 hours? 12 hours later, I was walking through Malpensa Airport, my single carry-on bag feeling absurdly inadequate for whatever was waiting for me in Milan. The city pulsed with the energy of Fashion Week preparation. Even the airport terminals were filled with impossibly tall, impossibly beautiful people, hurrying between flights with garment bags and portfolio cases. Valentina met me personally at the VIP exit, something she'd never done before. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She was a woman in her early 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of understated elegance that only comes from decades at the pinnacle of international fashion. But today, she looked different. Excited, almost nervous, like she was about to change the world. "Sophia," she said, embracing me in the European fashion that still felt foreign after my military formality. "What I'm about to show you must remain absolutely confidential until tomorrow's announcement." We drove through Milan in her black Mercedes, past medieval churches and modern boutiques, until we reached the Palazzo degli Stellini, an exclusive venue that hosted only the most prestigious fashion events. Inside, the building buzzed with barely contained energy, dozens of staff members preparing for something massive. Valentina led me to a private conference room where the walls were covered with photographs, design sketches, and marketing materials that took my breath away. Every image featured faces like mine, scarred, unconventional, authentically beautiful in ways that defied traditional standards. "Project Renaissance," she said, gesturing to the displays. "The largest authentic beauty campaign in fashion history. 15 major fashion houses, coordinated launches across 4 continents, and a completely new definition of what it means to be beautiful in the modern world." She turned to face me, her expression intense with possibility. "Sophia, we're not offering you a modeling contract. We're offering you the chance to become the global face of a movement that will fundamentally change how the world sees beauty. You would be our primary ambassador, our voice, our representation of everything this campaign stands for." The financial terms she outlined made my head spin. A 5-year exclusive contract worth $100 million, with additional earnings from endorsements, appearances, and profit sharing that could reach 8 figures annually. It was more money than I'd ever imagined existing, let alone earning. "The announcement happens tomorrow at Milan Fashion Week's opening ceremony," Valentina continued. "The global launch is coordinated with New York, Paris, and London. By this time tomorrow, your face will be on billboards in Times Square, the Champs-Élysées, and Piccadilly Circus." I stared at the campaign materials, trying to process what was happening. 24 hours ago, I'd been told I was too ugly for family photographs. Now the fashion world wanted to make me the global symbol of authentic beauty. "Why me?" I asked quietly. Valentina smiled. "Because you represent something that can't be manufactured, bought, or faked. You represent the future of beauty, real, earned, and absolutely revolutionary." What started as excitement about Project Renaissance began to reveal itself as something far more sinister as I dove deeper into the fashion industry's inner workings. The authentic beauty movement wasn't just about changing aesthetic standards. It was about exposing a decades-old system of exploitation that had enriched powerful agencies while destroying countless young women's lives. Over the next week, as I attended confidential briefings in Milan's most exclusive design studios, I discovered a pattern that made my stomach turn. Traditional modeling agencies hadn't just been promoting unrealistic beauty standards. They'd been systematically trafficking vulnerable young women, manipulating their finances, and covering up abuse that reached the highest levels of the industry. The scope was staggering. Elite model management had been operating what amounted to debt slavery operations, trapping teenage models in contracts that made them financially dependent, while subjecting them to dangerous working conditions. Ford models had been systematically covering up sexual assault cases, using non-disclosure agreements and financial intimidation to silence victims. IMG models had been laundering money through fake casting agencies, using the fashion industry as a front for international criminal enterprises. But the pattern went deeper than exploitation. As Valentina shared confidential industry reports, I realized that the traditional modeling system was designed to fail. Agencies deliberately selected mentally fragile teenagers, isolated them from their families, and created cycles of abuse that generated maximum profit while destroying lives. "Sophia," Valentina explained during a private dinner at her Milanese apartment, "Project Renaissance isn't just about celebrating authentic beauty. It's about dismantling a criminal network that has operated with impunity for 40 years. The fashion industry's power structure depends on vulnerable, disposable women who can be exploited and discarded. She showed me FBI reports, Interpol investigations, and confidential testimonies from models who had escaped the traditional agency system. The stories were horrifying. Young women forced into debt, coerced into dangerous situations, and silenced through legal threats when they tried to speak out. The files revealed financial connections between major modeling agencies and international crime syndicates, all disguised as legitimate business partnerships. Money from human trafficking was being laundered through fashion weeks, modeling contracts, and industry events. The entire traditional modeling ecosystem was a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The authentic beauty movement threatens their business model, Valentina continued. If the industry celebrates women like you, mature, independent, psychologically stable, the exploitation system collapses. That's why we've been operating in absolute secrecy. That's why this announcement will trigger a war. Fashion Week's legal team briefed me on the federal investigations that were quietly underway. Multiple law enforcement agencies had been tracking suspicious financial flows for 3 years, but they needed someone on the inside to understand how the exploitation worked. Someone who had military experience with complex operations and couldn't be intimidated or corrupted. That someone, apparently, was me. Ms. Carson, said Agent Maria Rodriguez during a classified briefing at Milan's U.S. consulate, your background makes you uniquely qualified to help us expose this network. You understand institutional corruption from your military service, you're psychologically resilient from your combat experience, and most importantly, you're not part of the existing fashion establishment that might be compromised. The investigation files painted a picture of systematic abuse that reached into some of the world's most glamorous institutions. Agency executives were trafficking minors, fashion photographers were running escort services, and industry leaders were using their positions to exploit vulnerable women on an international scale. What made it worse was realizing that while I'd been building genuine confidence through military service and authentic achievement, these predators had been destroying young women's self-worth to make them easier to control and exploit. The irony was bitter. My family saw me as ugly because I didn't fit traditional beauty standards, but those standards were specifically designed to identify and exploit victims. The phone call that destroyed everything came 4 days after Project Renaissance's announcement. While I was still processing the global media explosion that had made my face recognizable on every continent, Agent Rodriguez called with an update that made me physically ill. Ms. Carson, we've identified another person of interest in the trafficking network, she said, her voice carefully measured. Someone with direct connections to both elite model management and the financial laundering operations. We need you to review some documents immediately. The file she sent contained bank records, agency contracts, and wire transfer receipts that painted a clear picture of systematic exploitation. But it was the signature at the bottom of a talent scout agreement that made my hands shake. Emma L. Carson, my sister's full legal name. My beautiful Instagram-famous sister, the family golden child who had always been praised for her conventional attractiveness, had been working as a regional talent coordinator for Elite Scouting International, a shell company that existed solely to identify and traffic vulnerable young women into the traditional modeling system. The documents were damning. Emma wasn't some naive employee who didn't understand what she was doing. She was actively recruiting teenage girls from small towns and military families, specifically targeting those with financial desperation or family instability. In one email to her supervisor, she wrote, "Military daughters are perfect targets. They're already trained to follow orders, and their families move frequently, making them harder to track." But the revelation that shattered me completely came in a recorded phone conversation between Emma and our mother. The FBI had been monitoring Elite Scouting's communications for months, and my family's conversations had inadvertently become evidence in a federal investigation. "Mom, you need to keep Sophia away from the high fashion world." Emma's voice was clear on the recording. "Her authentic beauty thing is making agencies nervous about their existing recruitment methods. If she starts asking questions about how we find new talent, it could expose our entire operation." My mother's response was like acid in my veins. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Your father and I have been calling her ugly for years, specifically to keep her out of modeling. The last thing we need is Sophia stumbling into something that could hurt your career or expose what we've been doing." Everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The wedding photo incident wasn't spontaneous cruelty. It was calculated psychological warfare. My family's constant attacks on my appearance, their insistence that I was too damaged and scarred for the fashion world, their systematic destruction of my self-confidence. It was all designed to keep me from pursuing opportunities that might threaten Emma's criminal enterprise. They hadn't just rejected my appearance, they had weaponized my insecurities to protect their participation in human trafficking. Every family gathering where they'd mocked my scars, every comment about my masculine military bearing, every suggestion that I could never be beautiful enough for modeling. It was strategic psychological manipulation designed to maintain their criminal conspiracy. The worst part was discovering the scope of their operation. Bank records showed Emma had received over $300,000 in recruitment bonuses over 3 years, payments for delivering vulnerable teenagers to agencies that would exploit and abuse them. My mother had been using her social connections to identify potential victims, targeting military wives whose daughters might be susceptible to modeling promises. I sat in my Milan hotel room that night, staring at financial documents that proved my sister was a human trafficker and my parents were her accomplices, and realized that the family that had spent years destroying my self-worth had been projecting their own moral bankruptcy onto me. They hadn't called me ugly because I was unattractive. They had called me ugly because my authentic confidence threatened their ability to exploit women who believed they weren't beautiful enough without external validation. I flew back to Virginia on a red-eye flight, carrying a folder full of evidence that would destroy Emma's life and expose our parents as accomplices to human trafficking. The suburban house where I'd grown up looked different now, not like a family home, but like a headquarters for exploitation disguised behind white picket fences and perfectly maintained gardens. Emma answered the door in designer workout clothes that I now knew were purchased with blood money, earned by delivering vulnerable teenagers to predators. Her face lit up with the kind of fake sisterly excitement she'd perfected over the years. "Sophia, oh my God, I saw you on the cover of Vogue. Mom is so proud. She's been telling everyone at the country club about her supermodel daughter." "Can we talk inside?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. Her living room was a shrine to conventional beauty, framed magazine covers featuring traditional models, fashion photography celebrating impossible standards, awards from modeling agencies that I now knew were criminal organizations. Every piece represented the systematic destruction of young women's lives, displayed like trophies. "I know about Elite Scouting International," I said without preamble, placing the folder on her glass coffee table. "I know about the trafficking operation, the recruitment bonuses, and your role in delivering vulnerable girls to agencies that would exploit them." Emma's smile didn't falter, but something predatory flickered behind her eyes. She picked up the folder, flipped through a few pages, then set it down with the casual indifference of someone who'd been expecting this conversation. "Oh, Sophia," she said, settling into her white leather chair like she was about to educate a particularly naive child. "You always were too idealistic about how the world actually works. You think the modeling industry runs on talent and beauty, but that's not how real success happens." "Real success?" I stared at her, incredulous. "You trafficked teenage girls to sexual predators." "I connected aspiring models with opportunities," she corrected, her tone maddeningly calm. "Do you know how many girls dream of modeling careers? How many would never get a chance without someone to guide them into the industry? At least I helped them access a world they desperately wanted to enter. You targeted military families because you knew we'd be harder to track," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay controlled. "You specifically recruited girls with trauma and financial desperation because they'd be easier to control." Emma stood up and walked to her window, gazing out at the suburban landscape where she'd built her criminal enterprise. "You spent 5 years in the military following orders and carrying wounded people around. I spent 5 years building networks and creating opportunities for young women who understood that beauty requires sacrifice." "Sacrifice?" My hands were shaking with rage. "You delivered children to rapists." She turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw who she'd really become. Not my successful sister, but a sociopath who had convinced herself that trafficking was mentorship. "You know what your problem is, Sophia? You think conventional beauty standards are oppressive, but you don't understand that they create opportunities. The girls I recruited got to experience a glamorous world they never could have accessed otherwise. Yes, some of them had difficult experiences, but that's the price of entering an exclusive industry." Difficult experiences, I repeated. Rape, financial abuse, and psychological torture. Growing pains, she said dismissively. Every successful model has stories about paying dues and making sacrifices. The difference between winners and losers is who's willing to do whatever it takes. I stood up, my entire body trembling with anger. Those girls you're so casually dismissing? They were children whose lives you destroyed for commission payments. And every girl I helped access the modeling world got opportunities they would never have had without my connections. She shot back. You're upset because you can't see the bigger picture. I picked up the folder and headed for the door. The bigger picture is that you're a human trafficker, Emma. The FBI will be here tomorrow morning. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by evidence that could destroy my family, and wondering if I had the moral strength to become the key witness in a federal human trafficking case. Agent Rodriguez had made it clear. My testimony was crucial to dismantling the entire network, but cooperating would mean sending Emma to federal prison for decades and exposing my parents as accomplices to child exploitation. The easy path stretched before me like a red carpet. I could take the $100 million modeling contract, focus on my revolutionary fashion career, and let the investigation proceed without my family's involvement. Project Renaissance was already changing the industry. I could simply be the face of authentic beauty while letting other people handle the criminal justice aspects. Valentina had even suggested this approach during a private call from Milan. Sophia, your sister's role is peripheral to the main trafficking operation, she'd explained. We have enough evidence to prosecute the agency executives without your family testimony. You could focus on your modeling career and let this situation resolve itself quietly. But sitting in that bedroom where I'd spent years believing I was too ugly for the world, staring at bank records showing Emma's trafficking commissions while looking at photos from my military service, I realized that silence was its own form of betrayal. Every girl Emma had delivered to predators was someone's daughter. The $50,000 she'd earned in just 1 month recruiting vulnerable teenagers was money paid specifically for destroying young lives. The designer handbags in her closet weren't just status symbols. They were purchased with payments for delivering children to sexual abuse. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Saw you on Entertainment Tonight. The whole neighborhood is talking about our supermodel daughter. Emma says you might even get us invitations to Fashion Week parties. The casual excitement in that message, coming just hours after I discovered their systematic conspiracy to destroy young women's lives, crystallized everything. They weren't just complicit in trafficking. They were celebrating their success while planning to exploit my newfound fame for social access. I thought about the military oath I'd taken 6 years earlier, to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Emma wasn't some foreign terrorist threatening American children. She was a domestic predator who had weaponized beauty standards to identify and deliver vulnerable girls to criminal organizations. I thought about the teenagers I'd met during veteran outreach programs, military daughters who struggled with self-worth and identity while their families moved between bases. I thought about the young women Emma had specifically targeted because their military backgrounds made them quote, 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 quote. I thought about the girls who trusted her promises of modeling opportunities because they thought someone finally saw beauty in them. How could I look at their suffering and choose family loyalty over justice? The choice crystallized with brutal clarity. I could either be the person who protected traffickers because they shared my DNA, or I could be the person who protected children because they deserved someone to fight for them. At 2:17 a.m., I called Agent Rodriguez. I'll testify, I said. I'll tell you everything I know about Emma's recruitment methods, my parents' involvement, and any other evidence that might help your case. Are you certain, Miss Carson? This will permanently alter your relationship with your family. My family relationships were built on the systematic abuse of children anyway, I replied. At least this way, some girls might be protected from what Emma did to others. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Rodriguez said, "We'll begin with your formal deposition tomorrow. Thank you for choosing to protect the victims." I hung up and felt something I hadn't experienced since my military service. The peace that comes from choosing duty over comfort, even when the personal cost is everything you thought you wanted to preserve. For 8 weeks, I lived a triple life that made my military deployments seem straightforward by comparison. At least in Afghanistan, the enemy wore different uniforms. Now I was appearing at family dinners as the celebrated supermodel daughter while wearing recording devices that captured my loved ones discussing their criminal trafficking operations. The FBI had equipped me with surveillance technology so advanced it was undetectable, even under professional photography lights. Every family gathering became an intelligence mission, every casual conversation, a potential piece of evidence that could send my relatives to federal prison for decades. The psychological strain was devastating. I'd sit at holiday dinners, listening to my parents brag about my fashion success while federal agents monitored their admissions about years of psychological warfare designed to keep me away from the modeling industry. I'd hug Emma goodbye while mentally cataloging her detailed explanations of recruitment techniques targeting vulnerable military families. Agent Rodriguez coached me carefully on extraction methods without arousing suspicion. Express interest in her business operations, she instructed, during our weekly debriefings. Let your parents reminisce about your childhood struggles with self-image. Encourage Emma to share recruitment strategies. But don't probe too aggressively or they'll become suspicious. The most damaging evidence came during a family celebration 6 weeks into the operation. Emma had been drinking wine, and our parents were relaxed in the familiar environment of their suburban home. The conversation naturally drifted to my Fashion Week appearances, and my father made a comment that would later become central to the prosecution's case. I have to admit, I was terrified when Sophia started getting recognition for her unconventional beauty, he said, refilling his scotch glass. Thank God we managed to destroy her self-confidence early enough to keep her away from modeling until it was safe for Emma's operation. My mother laughed, raising her wine glass. Remember all those years we told her she was too scarred and masculine from modeling? Poor thing believed us completely, but we couldn't risk her discovering how the recruitment industry actually worked. Emma raised her glass in a mock toast. To family loyalty, she said with a satisfied smile. Sometimes protecting your sister's criminal enterprise requires making her believe she's ugly. I smiled and clinked glasses with my sister while my hidden recorder captured her confession to years of systematic psychological abuse designed to protect human trafficking operations. The federal agents listening in real time later told me it was the clearest admission of family conspiracy they'd ever documented. But the operation's most valuable evidence came during a private conversation with Emma in our parents' kitchen. She'd been drinking heavily and seemed to mistake my newfound interest in her work for admiration rather than investigation. You know, Sophia, I always felt guilty about the psychological warfare we used on you, she said, leaning against the marble countertop that her trafficking commissions had purchased. But you have too much integrity for recruitment work. You would have reported our methods to authorities within weeks. What kind of methods? I asked, my heart racing as I tried to sound casually curious. The beauty of elite scouting is that we provide desperate girls with exactly what they think they want, she continued, apparently convinced that her criminal conspiracy was sophisticated business strategy. We target teenagers with body image issues, military families with financial stress, and girls from unstable backgrounds. Then we promise them modeling careers, while delivering them to agencies that will exploit their vulnerabilities systematically. She detailed recruitment quotas, commission structures, and the specific psychological manipulation techniques used to identify and groom victims. My recording device captured her step-by-step explanation of how to traffic children while making them believe they were pursuing their dreams. The hardest moment came when she hugged me goodbye that night, whispering, "I'm so proud that you finally found success in fashion. Maybe now you understand why business sometimes requires moral compromises." I drove home with Emma's trafficking manual on tape, and the devastating knowledge that my family's love had always been conditional on my ignorance of their crimes against children. The arrests began at dawn on a Tuesday morning in March, 7 months after my cousin's wedding, where I had been called too ugly for family photographs. I was at a Vogue photo shoot in Manhattan, wearing a custom Valentino dress that celebrated authentic beauty, when Agent Rodriguez called to tell me the nightmare was over. "We executed warrants at 37 locations this morning," she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of justice finally served. "Your sister was arrested at her townhouse at 6:23 a.m. Your parents were taken into custody at 6:41 a.m. The evidence you provided was instrumental in dismantling the entire trafficking network. 46 people were charged in what federal prosecutors called the largest modeling industry trafficking conspiracy in U.S. history. Emma faced 23 counts of human trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy to exploit minors. My parents were charged as accessories to trafficking and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Elite Scouting International and 12 other recruitment companies were dissolved, their assets frozen, pending victim restitution. The trial lasted 11 months and became an international media phenomenon that exposed decades of systematic abuse, hidden behind fashion's glamorous facade. Emma's defense team tried to portray her as a misguided businesswoman who didn't understand the criminal nature of her recruitment work, but my recorded conversations obliterated that strategy completely. When prosecutors played the recording of Emma explaining her recruitment techniques to a jury of 12 ordinary citizens, several jurors wept openly. Her casual description of targeting vulnerable military daughters while sitting in a kitchen funded by trafficking proceeds was devastating testimony that sealed her conviction. My testimony was the prosecution's cornerstone. For 5 days, I detailed how the trafficking network operated, how my family had systematically destroyed my self-worth to protect their criminal enterprise, and how legitimate modeling opportunities were being deliberately blocked to maintain exploitation systems. Emma's attorney attempted to discredit me during cross-examination, suggesting that my cooperation with federal investigators was motivated by jealousy of my sister's conventional beauty. "Isn't it true, Miss Carson, that you resented your sister's success in traditional modeling?" he asked. "I resented my sister's crimes against children," I replied. "Success built on human trafficking isn't achievement. It's evidence of moral depravity that should horrify any decent person." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Emma was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. My parents received 7 years each for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The court ordered $47.3 million in restitution to be paid to trafficking victims, effectively destroying my family's accumulated wealth. But the convictions were only the beginning of systemic change. The fashion industry used the trial revelations to implement comprehensive oversight reforms. Major agencies adopted verification protocols I'd helped design with law enforcement. Fashion weeks worldwide established victim support services and mandatory reporting requirements for suspicious recruitment activities. Most importantly, the recovered assets funded a comprehensive victim services program. The money Emma had earned from trafficking children became counseling services, legal support, and educational scholarships for survivors. Her luxury lifestyle was transformed into healing resources for the girls she'd destroyed. Yet justice extracted its own price. My extended family disowned me completely, viewing my cooperation with federal investigators as an unforgivable betrayal of blood loyalty. Childhood friends chose sides, with many supporting my parents and viewing me as the daughter who destroyed her own family for career advancement. The media attention was relentless and often brutal. Some commentators painted me as an opportunistic whistleblower who'd exploited family secrets for publicity. Others lionized me as a heroic survivor in ways that felt equally inaccurate and uncomfortable. The fashion industry supported me throughout the ordeal, but I knew the trafficking scandal would define my career forever. Some people would always wonder if someone who'd betrayed her own family could ever be truly trusted with their secrets. 4 years after the trials ended, I stood backstage at Paris Fashion Week, adjusting the cape of 16-year-old Maya Rodriguez as she prepared for her debut runway walk. Maya wasn't a traditional model. She was a trafficking survivor whose story of resilience had become the centerpiece of my foundation's annual showcase. Her face bore faint scars from abuse she'd endured in the old system, but her eyes held the confident light of someone who knew her worth couldn't be manufactured or destroyed by others. This wasn't just another fashion show. As the founder and director of the Authentic Beauty Foundation, I was presenting our 5th annual Survivors Runway, where trafficking victims showcased designs created by ethical fashion houses committed to genuine reform. The event had become fashion's most prestigious celebration of authentic beauty, attended by industry leaders who understood that real change required confronting uncomfortable truths. The transformation had been extraordinary. Where once there had been predatory recruitment networks and exploitative agencies, we'd built comprehensive support systems for vulnerable young women. The $47.3 million in recovered trafficking proceeds had been supplemented by donations from fashion houses eager to demonstrate their ethical commitment. Together, these resources had created sustainable protection programs in 23 countries, serving over 8,000 at-risk teenagers annually. But the real change wasn't measured in dollars or program statistics. It was measured in trust rebuilt, in young women who could pursue modeling careers without fear of exploitation, and in an industry that had finally acknowledged its moral obligations to the people who created its beauty. Maya finished her final adjustments and turned to me with a smile that contained more validation than any magazine cover I'd ever graced. "Miss Carson," she said in the careful English she'd been perfecting since escaping a trafficking ring 2 years earlier, "I never thought I'd feel beautiful after what they did to me. But standing here, wearing this dress, knowing that people fought to make sure girls like me could be safe, this is what real beauty feels like." I knelt down to adjust her hem, looking into eyes that had seen unimaginable horror but still sparkled with determination and hope. "Maya, you were always beautiful," I said. "What we did was create a world that could recognize and protect that beauty instead of exploiting it." She nodded, then smiled with the confidence that comes from surviving hell and choosing to help others avoid the same fate. "When I have my own fashion company someday, I want to hire other survivors. I want to show the world that we're not broken, we're powerful." As I watched Maya walk the runway to thunderous applause, I thought about the journey that had brought us both to this moment. The family that had once called me too ugly for photographs was now serving the final years of their prison sentences. Emma had been denied parole twice for refusing to acknowledge the full scope of her crimes. My parents had lost everything they'd accumulated through decades of complicity in child exploitation. But I had found something they never understood: the difference between beauty and authenticity, between success and significance, between being celebrated and being transformational. My modeling career had evolved far beyond what anyone had initially envisioned. As the global face of Project Renaissance, I'd graced covers in 47 countries, walked runways for every major fashion house, and earned more money than I'd ever dreamed possible. But more importantly, I'd used that platform to fundamentally change how the industry operated. The Carson Protocols, a comprehensive set of protection standards I'd developed with law enforcement and survivor advocates, had been adopted by over 400 agencies worldwide. These weren't just anti-trafficking measures. They were holistic approaches to ensuring that fashion celebrated authentic human beauty, rather than exploiting human vulnerability. The protocols required psychological evaluation and support for all models, transparent financial arrangements with no debt bondage, mandatory reporting of suspicious recruitment activities, and survivor-centered approaches to industry reform. Agencies were evaluated not on how much profit they generated, but on how well they protected and empowered the people they represented. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's betrayal had ultimately made me more effective at the work I'd been born to do. My experience with systematic psychological abuse had given me insights into how predators operated. My military background had taught me how to build institutional systems that could resist corruption. My personal sacrifice had given me credibility with survivors who understood that real change required people willing to lose everything for justice. Fashion's international reputation had not only recovered from the trafficking scandals, it had been elevated by our response to them. We'd become the gold standard for ethical beauty industries, and companies around the world sent executives to study our protection methods. But the most meaningful validation came from the survivors we served. Last week, I'd received a letter from Alicia Martinez, a young woman we'd helped escape a recruitment trap 3 years earlier. Before the foundation, when modeling scouts approached girls like me, we didn't know how to tell the difference between opportunity and exploitation, she'd written. Now we know that real opportunities come with protection, support, and respect. Thank you for making sure that beauty can be a source of strength instead of vulnerability. The personal costs of my choices had been severe and permanent. My relationship with my extended family never recovered. Cousins who had grown up celebrating birthdays with me now treated me like a traitor who had destroyed sacred family bonds for personal advancement. Former family friends crossed the street to avoid acknowledging someone who had chosen justice over loyalty. But I had found a new kind of family among survivors who shared my values, veterans who understood the cost of moral courage, and fashion professionals around the world who believed that beauty should elevate humanity rather than exploit it. 8 months ago, I'd received an unexpected letter from Emma in federal prison. She was serving her 14th year of an 18-year sentence and had requested a meeting through her attorney. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she'd written, "but I've been in therapy for 3 years, and I finally understand what we did to those girls. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want you to know that I've spent every day since my conviction thinking about the lives we destroyed." I hadn't responded yet. Perhaps I would, perhaps I wouldn't. Forgiveness was something I was still learning to navigate, and I discovered that healing didn't require reconciliation with people who had chosen criminal exploitation over family integrity. Standing in that Paris theater, watching Maya receive a standing ovation from an audience that included survivors, advocates, and industry leaders committed to genuine reform, I realized that some stories don't end with family reunions or Hollywood reconciliations. Sometimes they end with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that your choices created more protection than exploitation, that your sacrifices served something larger than your own comfort. Maya finished her walk and returned backstage, her face glowing with the kind of authentic confidence that no amount of conventional beauty could manufacture. "Miss Carson," she said, embracing me with the familiarity of someone who had found safety after surviving hell. "Thank you for showing the world that we deserve to be protected, not used." I smiled, thinking of all the people who had called me too ugly for family photographs while I was building systems to protect young women exactly like Maya. "Thank you for proving that survivors aren't victims. You're the future of authentic beauty," I replied. "Some victories are measured in magazine covers and runway appearances. Others are measured in 16-year-old trafficking survivors who can walk fashion's most prestigious stages because someone chose justice over comfort, protection over profit, and the future over the past." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.